2, 3.
Hi, I'm Annie.
And I'm Paula.
Welcome to the Motherhood and More podcast,
where two BFFs,
that's us,
share our seasoned perspectives on motherhood.
and more.
Hi, Annie.
Hi, Paula.
How are you
How
doing?
Are you? Good. How are you?
I'm fine. It's been so long since we've podcasted, but that's because there was a whole summer between the last time and this time.
Yeah, it's been a minute. We've
been
had
a
a
minute.
couple of people complain to us.
The two people have complained to us. And both of them may have been our children.
One of them is a relative and one of them is an old friend, but hey, it's all good.
But that's okay.
We have listeners.
And that's exciting. We're trying to build the listeners, but so much happened between the last time and this time that almost a lot of it, like, we couldn't have podcasted just because of everything that was going on. We might not have been. We tried a couple of times, actually. We
had plans.
Do we want
had
to talk
plans?
about?
We actually saw each other. We saw each other in Seattle and had plans to actually podcast live together. That did not happen.
We were having too much fun in Seattle.
Seriously, we were. And then by the time we were done having fun all day, we were like, we're too tired to do
so
anything
tired.
else.
Right.
And then another time that we actually sat down and were scheduled to podcast and all ready to podcast, I was having a little emotional breakdown.
So we were going to podcast the second half of mental health, talking about kids' mental health, having our actual children participate. And then what happened?
Well, one of my children was going through a particularly rough moment, and I was having a hard time keeping it together to talk about anything related to my kids or mental health or anything. So yeah, I started crying and then we had to stop. And not that we would have to stop if I was crying, because I think that's fine. It's just I couldn't not cry, and it was just going to be a big blubbery mess. So
because it's hard on the parents.
So
yeah, things are better now.
I know, it was actually kind of a perfect example.
Like how hard it is on the parents to walk through this mental health process with our children.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to postpone that one until a better time. And also, our kids have to be if they're going to participate, or any kids are going to participate, it needs to be up to them. They need to be running that show. And until they say, okay, I'd really like to run that show. Yeah. We're going to postpone it.
Yeah.
So today, instead, we're talking about probably an equally as difficult topic, and that is raising older children and empty nesting. And yes. I'm going to try not to cry.
Paula is the empty nester here. I have 2 adult children who are still living at home, which is so funny because that sounds like, I mean, I feel like in the days of old, when you said like I had adult children living at home, like that was an unusual thing, or it meant something, they were like living in your basement playing video games all day or something. It's not the case. Like we live in a college town right next to another college town, and my oldest has just lived at home while going to college, and then my younger adult child just turned 18 this summer and is still actually in high school / community college, and she'll graduate actually in March. So it's all fine. It's just that Paula has an actual empty nest.
So let's start by saying I'm Paula and this is Annie, and we're the Motherhood and More podcast, and we talk about motherhood and more. And the topic for this time is raising grown children and empty nesting. And I'm a new empty nester. So the reason that we got to see Annie and her husband and then their youngest child in Seattle is that my son moved to Seattle in July. We actually took we took a road trip. It was my youngest daughter's graduation trip, and she wanted to go to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So we drove up the coast, the coastal part of California, to Ashland, where my son caught a plane to Seattle to start his year in City Year, which is a subsidiary of AmeriCorps, which is like the Peace Corps, but in the United States. For those who don't know, It's a great program if you're looking for an alternative to college for your child. You don't have to be a college graduate. So we went to go visit him in Seattle. And that's how we got to hang out with Annie and her husband and younger son. And then in August, of just a few weeks later, we took my daughter to college where she is a BFA student in theater. So it's emptied quickly. And I don't recommend that you empty two out at once at all.
You actually, it's funny. I hadn't made this like connection, but you started off parenting all at once, like 3 kids within 11 months.
Right.
And then now you sort of ended your at-home parenting career all within like
4 weeks.
a very short period of
Right.
time. Yeah.
Yes. Because for new listeners, so I have 3 children, 2 we adopted, and then the third arrived by birth 11 months later. So they're different ages, but they all came. So yes, they came quickly. So we started quickly and we ended quickly. And both were very hard.
Let's start just real quick because it sort of covers both. Let's start with the like, all of a sudden your child is a legal adult. That like
Yes.
turning 18 milestone surprised me. I didn't expect to kind of be affected by it at all. I kind of feel like birthdays, there's certain milestone birthdays that sort of feel significant. But that 18, it was so weird when my oldest turned 18. And it was like, I woke up in the morning and I was like, oh, they're not just like an adult, like legally, they are responsible for themselves now. Like overnight, they went from I'm responsible for this person legally to they're responsible for themselves legally. It's not like I thought my kid was going to go out and do anything
Right.
that would throw them into jail or, anything like that. But it struck me that like, number one, again, I had no fear of this happening clearly because she's still living at home 4 years later, but like she could walk out the door and I couldn't make her come back. Like she could just run away, and there'd be nothing that I could do about it. And vice versa. Like we could kick her out of the house and like she would have no recourse. Like she would just be literally on her own. And it was just such a weird, like the weird part of it to me is that it just happens literally overnight. I mean, it's a birthday, right? Like it's like 1 second they're legally a child, and then the next second they're legally an adult. It's just a strange moment to feel as a parent, like, oh weird, my legal job is done here. It's not that your job is done, and we'll talk a lot about that, I think, but legally I'm done here.
At least in the United States. I don't know what it is in other countries. You actually wrote an article about this. Look, I have it right here.
You printed it off in color.
I printed your article. I printed it, and then I even had the color. I sprung for the color for you.
Can I also just point out that you clearly printed it in large font?
I know, but look, I even highlighted it. It's so important.
Oh,
right.
What did you highlight?
Well, you say, touching upon what you just said, you are now responsible for yourself in the legal sense. You can sign your own contracts. You can apply for your own credit. You can give consent for sex. You can officially get sued. If you were to commit a crime, you'd be 100% accountable. You could go to prison. And then you say, not that I anticipate that happening, of course, no, nor do I anticipate the other reality that dawned on me. You could technically walk out the door and never come back, and there's nothing I could do about it. The authorities couldn't make you come back home. And I thought, so when I was looking through the archives and found this, I thought that was so powerful for a few reasons. One, it's one day, like you said, it's one day. Your kid could be snuggling up with you on the couch one day, and you could be responsible for everything in their entire life. You are. And then the very next day, at least in the United States, you don't even have access to a lot of the things that you used to have access to.
Oh, right. Yeah. You ran into that. I remember running into that too with like medical stuff. Like all of a sudden they're the one, like the doctor or the person on the front desk at the doctor can't talk to me about stuff unless they sign a piece of paper that says they can.
Or even like school. If you are a person who has an 18-year-old senior, you can't go look at their grades. You don't have any recourse in what happens with them at school. And that is so interesting to me and kind of bizarre at the same time, because nothing about their development changes that night.
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
They still need us.
Right.
And they
It's
still,
really just all changes on paper, but there's
right.
significant changes on paper. It's so weird.
Well, yes. And we, with our oldest, didn't know to do anything about this. And then we learned with our oldest when she had a medical emergency and we
Mm,
had no part of the discussion, we learned to put together all of the legal paperwork. So that is something that I'm now telling everybody whose child is 17.
yeah.
Get that legal paperwork in order now. That's really important. There's also all the financial stuff.
Hmm.
But a big one too is if you have a will and your children are in it, once they become adults, they're technically in charge of that will. There's no more guardianship. There's no more of any of that. But really, could an 18-year-old who has just very sadly become an orphan take care of all of their needs emotionally, financially? Would they know how to plan for the next day or the future? Would they know what to do with their families, everything that's been left behind? So in our
Yeah.
legal documentation, we actually assigned people who would supervise the process. So the people
Mm,
that we gave that power to would ultimately make final decisions for our
mm,
adult children until they reach a certain age, because
yeah.
we didn't want them to feel like they were just out there alone. We wanted them to have someone looking over and helping them and being a support for them in that way. So that's something I would also add to all the documents that you assemble.
That's really smart. And we need to go back through our will because we made it when the kids were little and it's been a long
Oh,
time since we've even looked at it. Oh, ugh, all these,
yeah.
I mean, I'm 100% in favor of all these things, but man, all of these like technical things in life are, I find them quite baffling isn't quite the right word, but challenging to keep up with. And think about how many of these things you only know about or hear about from word of mouth. I'm kind of
Right.
fascinated by the way that as a society we function. Like who tells you that, oh, your child is 18 now? You need to have them sign something so that the doctor can tell you about things if they want them to, or the will. I mean, you're sharing this information, which will probably help somebody out there right now. But like, I feel like we need they always make jokes about like, we need an adulting manual. It's
Well,
like,
we
we
do need
really
an adulting. Well, you also need like a parenting older kids manual.
yeah.
Why are there, I've said it before, why are there so many books on changing diapers and getting kids potty trained?
Yeah.
Like that old, when you're in the thick of that, that feels really, really hard. But it's much harder to start thinking about your mortality in terms of your adult children or their mortality.
Yeah.
Or, because they have documents they have to sign as well. So they have to sign
Mhm.
documents, um, for example, saying who can come be a part of their medical experience, depending on what state I'm guessing that they're in.
Yeah.
But our kids had to sign power of attorney documents so that we could help be there for them if, anything terrible happened or catastrophic happened. Then there are
Yeah.
even all the things like, if you have this need for whatever reason to talk to the college that they go to, certain documents have to be signed. We thankfully don't have that need, but like even to for us to pay for my daughter's college, and this, she had to give us permission to get into the account to pay for it.
And this, oh, I could start going off on a little rant here about the FAFSA.
Oh, yes.
But
So, well, people
let's
want
talk
you to
about
hear
the
that.
fact that,
Let's talk
yeah,
about, yeah.
they're at 18, legally an adult and responsible for
Yes.
themselves. And yet the financial aid forms all take into consideration the parent's income. And that's how they determine what your financial aid is going to be. It's such a weird
Well,
system.
so for me, this was really horrible because I had no relationship with my parents
Right.
and they were still taking their financial information into account, um,
Yeah.
which was horrible. Yes, there are many young people who are penalized for having
Mhm.
bad relationships with their parents or no relationships with their parents
Yeah.
because of that system. And it is very strange when you're filling out all this FAFSA stuff and then you go to cross-reference something with the college. And I'm sure there are many parents whose kids haven't let them in. And then it's like, well, how do I'm supposed to pay a really huge check right now, but I'm not allowed to have access to this. And I don't know what the answers are. We've been very fortunate that it hasn't been an issue in terms of college or finances or that kind of a thing. I think our daughter
Mhm.
even gave us access to her grades if we want them. We haven't looked at it because she
Mhm.
just tells us, but I'm sure that that is another issue that a lot of people run into.
Yeah, the other thing too, I feel like, it's interesting to have your perspective here too, because you did come from a family where at 18 you were basically on your own,
Right.
right? Like,
I was
and I
basically
think
on my own
about,
at 18, and then at 20, I was completely separated from my family.
okay, yeah. So the other thing that I think about is like the people who don't have actively involved parents who teach them all of these things. Like,
Mhm.
one thing that comes to mind with turning 18 is you're now legally allowed to vote, right? So,
Right.
and every state is different. But I feel like I don't know what high school education is like right now. I don't remember going through anything in high school that really explained like how to figure out who to vote for, how to figure out what was on the ballot and how to find out the information about what was on the
Right.
ballot. And that again is different in every state, so it's not like there's some universal thing here. But like, I mean, when my kids turned 18, it's like, okay, we have to show them. And in Washington, we get our ballots mailed to us, which is awesome. And we usually get a voter pamphlet in the mail, but we can go online. There's a website now that, you can look through and read all of the things about, the candidates or the issues that are on the
Right.
ballot and whatnot. But it's confusing. I'm a 47-year-old adult, and there are some things on the ballot where
Right.
I read the issue on the ballot or whatever it's for, and I'm like, I don't really understand what this means. And then I look it up in the voter pamphlet, and I still don't really fully understand what
Right.
it means.
That.
That's
Yes,
smart.
that's a huge one. How do you vote? How do you even register to vote? I mean, there are all these
Right.
different um things that happen when you're 18. We're trying to get a passport for our youngest right now, and
Mhm.
she's having to do all of it because she's 18. So we can
Mhm.
make an appointment, but that's about it. She has to do everything
Yeah.
else. You
Yeah.
know, it's so the legal part of our kids turning 18 is much more expansive than I thought. Now, I will say, I
Yeah.
believe grownandflown.com has a pamphlet, an e-pamphlet that you can purchase that gives you some legal information for turning 18.
Oh,
So
that's
all
smart. I was thinking about that. That would be a good thing to be out there. Well, let's move on to empty nesting. So tell me about your first day or week
oh,
in your home when all of your kids had flown.
okay. And we will go back to more about raising older kids, whether you're home or not. So I think I said this in a previous podcast. The bizarre thing about this phase is that at the same time that a parent is feeling so much pride and excitement and joy for the experience that their adult child is having, it's very possible that many of us are feeling just grief and missing out this, like, I'm missing out on those experiences, sadness, loneliness at the exact same time. And it is a concoction of emotions that I've never before experienced.
Mm.
So that first week, well, first of all, we dropped my daughter off at college. We spent 3 or 4 days with her. I'm getting her all situated and everything. And she requested those 3 or 4 days, which is my first big rule for this process, by the way. Let them guide everything. We
Mm.
had planned, she had asked us to stay for 4 days. We planned that we would stay for 4 days, but we told her, if at any point you want us to go, we will go. She had planned on staying in the Airbnb with us, and we had told her, if in any place you want to stay in your dorm, please stay in your dorm. You call all the shots. You tell us what you want to see, what you don't want to see, and that kind of thing. So we had those days, and there was tension because she was nervous, we were nervous, not like fighting or anything like that, but just that tension of how many emotions were all being bundled into one. And on her part, as the child who was staying, she was trying to keep it together. Like her whole life
Mhm.
was about to change. She was trying to keep it together
Yeah.
while also recognizing that she was starting this exciting new part of her life that she couldn't wait to begin. And then
Mhm.
on our part, we were teetering that balance of we wanted her to know how much we were going to miss her. And also, we didn't want her to have to take on our emotions or have to be responsible for our emotions. We actually had a long conversation about it on the way out. On the driving out. We were saying,
Mhm.
what do you need from us? Do you want us to keep all of our emotions from you? Do you want us to go ahead and show you how we're feeling? What do you need
Mhm.
from us? And she said, well, right now, I don't know. She said, I
Mhm.
do want to know how much you're going to miss me. I do want to know how sad you are to say goodbye. I do need to hear those things. And she said, but I'll let you
Mhm.
know when we get there. And there were a couple of
Mhm.
times when she had to say, we're going to do this thing right now. I need you to keep it together for this,
Yeah.
which I really
Mhm.
appreciated. I really
Mhm.
appreciated her guiding the emotional process. So we
Yeah.
get in the car. I tried really hard to keep it together on the drive home. And then, yeah, that first night, I just completely lost it because
Mhm.
my son was off doing his own thing. She now was off doing her own thing. She had been my little shadow from the moment she was born. She was a very shy child. And um, so she was my little shadow, my little mini me.
Mhm.
And here she
Yeah.
was. The feelings were more than me feeling um that the missing her and the sadness for myself were that fear of how is she doing? Is she
Yeah.
sad? Is she missing me? I didn't want
Yeah.
her to miss me. I
Yeah.
didn't want her to feel sad. I wanted her to feel empowered to lead this part of her life. So a
Yeah.
lot of that emotion was thinking about her being homesick,
Mhm.
thinking about what that would do to her.
Yeah.
So that was really, really hard. Now, there was a big positive for us in that our oldest child has never had us alone, ever.
Mm.
When she came,
Right.
when we adopted her and her brother at the same time, as you know. And so she had never had alone time for any kind of extended period of time with us alone.
Mhm.
So that's been a really lovely perk. And one day, shortly after we dropped our youngest off, we spent the whole day with her she was getting ready to move to a new apartment. And we spent the whole day with her. And at some point we went, oh my goodness, we've never done this before. So that's been a lovely perk. So I will say that probably makes it a little bit easier than for those people who have all of their children going to other
Mm.
states, but
Yeah.
it's not easy. It's really hard. And do you want to know the things that I would advise other people to do?
Yeah.
Um, one is make our child, knowing herself, asked us to not let her quit or come home or make any rash decisions until the one semester had ended.
Mhm.
And that was great because right around 3 weeks, when homesickness kicks in for almost everybody, and nobody
Mhm.
has formed super close bonds yet, she
Right.
did start to question her decisions and start to really think maybe I should be doing something different. And we kept to that promise. We said, you asked us
Mhm.
to wait until the end of the semester. And so let's talk about this again at Thanksgiving. When you come home for Thanksgiving, we can talk more about this. But for right now, we're going to table this discussion.
Yeah.
And by the time we got there for family weekend, which was at 7 weeks, she was feeling pretty secure about her decision and feeling very happy and had created some really strong bonds. So I think having conversations ahead of time with your child who's flying the
Mhm.
nest, um, about what their expectations are, what might happen, the snafus that might go on. I think
Yeah.
that's a really good plan.
Yes. And how helpful is it to have things now like Paula mentioned grownandflown.com. It's a website we
Mhm.
both, I think, have written for them.
Right.
And it's a website and Facebook page for parents of kids who are in their teens and young adulthood. And it's really a great resource. And it's a resource that was filled in by these two moms who saw a need. Like Paula mentioned, there's so many books, so many websites and everything for parents of young kids. And you do need a lot of support during that time, but man, do you need a lot of support during the teen and young adult years, especially because you're not, at that point, they have their own lives and their own privacy and stuff. And you don't want to be sharing things publicly, asking
Right.
questions about like, what do I do in this situation? It's not like a toddler who's throwing tantrums and you're asking for
Right.
advice about how to handle their behavior or something. It's big stuff and it's hard stuff and it's personal stuff. So the Grown and Flown has a Facebook group that is huge, I think, at this point. And
Mhm.
parents can ask questions in there and they can ask anonymously, which is great. And even things like practical stuff, like, one of our kids was considering going on Accutane, and they did. And by the way, that was one of the best decisions that we've ever made. But I was nervous about it because it's a pretty powerful drug, and I had heard
Right.
things and I wasn't sure. And you hear about it, maybe it doesn't work or it does damage. Anyway, all kinds of things. And so I did a lot of searching in that group to kind of hear personal stories about people who had been on it. And for those who don't know, Accutane, it's actually not even Accutane anymore. That's just like the old technical name for it, but it's a medication for acne, for severe acne. And it's a life changer. I mean, absolutely has made a huge difference in this, my kid's life who needed it. So, but looking through that group, you can find so much information. And I've seen a lot in that group about, especially at the beginning of the school year, all kinds of posts from people who had experienced this and been through it, who
Right.
said, like, don't let your kid quit their college
Right.
anytime in the first 6 weeks or 10 weeks, or, whatever, this kind of an arbitrary time period. But most of them are gonna call and say, I made a mistake. I don't like it here. They're gonna be miserable, they're gonna be lonely, whatever it is. That it's a very, very, very common experience, and tons of parents sharing that, once they get over that hump, then things even out most of the time. So yeah, it's a really, really great resource.
And I would say if you're using that resource, and you should, read through the comments, because one of the really important things, I think for everybody, but especially for someone like myself who's had a very different experience when I was on the other end, when I was the young adult going away. It's super important to see that there are so many different responses to this time of life, so many different things happening. So, for example, huge thing that's talked about on Grown and Flown are kids not being communicative. Now, when we were in college, I mean, well, when I was in college, there was a line at the payphone Sunday evening because everybody would like make a plan to call their parents Sunday evening. In fact, we would call in our house. I would call collect. And then my mom would say, "No, I will not accept the charge." And then she would call the payphone back because it was cheaper to call
Oh,
long distance than it was to call collect.
yeah.
So that's how we did it. So we would communicate once a week, if that much, um,
Hmm.
and through letters. And that was it for most people.
Right.
Now, we go from 20 texts a day from our children, and then they go to college, and some people receive no texts a day. Well, I was getting worried that we were unhealthy because we were getting a lot of communication. We were having
Mm.
family FaceTimes pretty regularly with the entire family joining in, lots of family group texts and that kind of a thing. So, grown and flown, so many people were saying, my kid is never responding. And then you would see the first few comments, totally normal, totally normal. So, I would
Mhm.
have to kind of go deep into it to see, okay, should I worry that so many texts are being thrown around? And a lot of people had that experience too. It kind of just
Right.
depends on what your communication style was
Yeah.
prior to your kids going away. So don't worry if you get on Grown and Flown or any other parenting group and you're not seeing yourself reflected back. You're,
Mhm.
you just want to keep looking and seeing what's out there, because I do think a big lesson for this, there's nothing that's normal.
Right. There's a lot of different normals.
That's a better way to put it. There are a
Mhm.
lot of different normals. Some teenagers appreciate a lot of guidance from their
Mhm.
parents. Um, some teenagers don't want any guidance at all. I had two in the same family. And then I had
Mhm.
another one who wanted a medium amount of guidance. And so
Right.
every child is different, and every teenager and every young adult is going to want something different from their parents. And I think maybe that's the biggest takeaway is you at this stage in your parenting, you have to be a good communicator. If you
Mm.
were not a good communicator, that's what you need to work on. You
Mhm.
know, you have to be able to say, let's talk about what this new phase of our relationship is going to look like at this point. Like that's
Yeah.
a great beginning question.
Yeah. I feel like too, this is the time of life where um I don't like to make super broad generalizations about parenting styles because I feel like it's always there's such a wide range and gamut. But the kind of the three umbrellas that have been talked about a lot during our parenting career are like the permissive parenting, the authoritarian parenting,
Yeah.
and then that kind of middle ground of authoritative parenting where
Right.
there's a lot of communication and a lot of mutual respect and
Right.
whatnot. And they do look to you for guidance. And I feel like this stage of parenting is when that particular style of parenting, quote unquote, um, really shines. I feel like this is where you sort of reap the benefit of those years of trying to strike that balance.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's always great. I mean, it's not like they always listen to you.
Right.
But I think about like, okay, the people who were raised with very authoritative parents, like that must be a weird transition to go from this model of the parent being the ultimate authority and you do what I say and this and that to all of a sudden them having this independence. Like that feels like a really
Right.
weird thing to try to figure out as a parent. Like if I were in that mindset, like how do you transition to having adult children? Like that's such a weird, I don't know, I feel like that's such a weird thing. I feel like for us it's been sort of like a gradual um shift, not even a shift. It's just been kind of a continuum of parenting as they become adults that has been very, I don't know, sort of like natural and I don't want to say smooth. I don't think any part of parenting is really smooth, but in terms of like relationship, a lot of that has been a fairly smooth transition. Um,
Because
although
you weren't
now, like with,
having go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because you weren't having to shift parenting styles, you were just having to develop that parenting style. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And the communication just becomes more and more, it becomes more and more complex as their issues and their lives become
Right.
more complex. And then it just sort of naturally, gradually shifts into this like, um, it's not a friend relationship because you are a parent and they're
Right.
a child and that dynamic is always there, but it's very much more of like um, a mutually respectful communication
Hmm.
pattern, as opposed to a power dynamic that's weird to try to shift out of.
Yes. And I think that so much of that has to start years before. One of the articles I
Mhm.
wrote for Grown and Flown was about how you need to prepare early for those teenage years. And one of the
Mm.
most important components of that is talking openly. And there, I was laughing a little bit when you were talking because there have been times in my parenting life when I've thought, maybe I shouldn't have taught my kids to be so open with me. Like, maybe keep some things down, maybe keep some things to yourself.
I don't want to know
Like,
this.
maybe there are some things I would prefer to know after it's already happened, or, after you've already resolved the issue yourself. But having said that, we have definitely established a culture in our family that it's better to err on the side of oversharing than undersharing.
Yeah.
And as much as that sometimes bites me in the butt, because it's like 1 in the morning and I'm still having a conversation. about something that I know is going to be resolved by a good night's sleep. We've both had that
Mhm.
conversation. Like sometimes you just want to say, go to sleep and let's see if this is still a concern in the morning, you know?
That is, honest to goodness, I feel like that is such a key piece of advice. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the most important pieces of advice that I have as a parent of older kids. Like I can't count how many times I've said to my children, and they get it now, and because they've experienced this so many times, I'm like, it's past 10 o'clock at night. This problem is not getting solved tonight.
Right. Right.
And you will be in a much better position because you won't be tired and your brain won't be reeling, especially kids with anxiety, right? Like when they get
Right.
tired and it's the end of the day and they've had all these experiences during the day that haven't fully been processed yet, like that is not the time to be solving a problem. That is not the time to be analyzing some big existential crisis you're going through. It's just not. Like,
Right.
go to bed. That's become my go-to now. Go to bed. Let's talk about it in the
Let's
morning.
sleep on it. Well, and
Yeah.
that age group tends to be very dramatic and hyperbolic. That's not an insult. It's just an observation. It is, you know,
Mhm.
think back to your own when you were that age. Everything was huge, right? One
Right.
friend was having some kind of an issue and it suddenly was the issue of the entire community of friends and that kind
Mhm.
of a thing. So, yeah, there are a lot of things that sometimes I think, "Oh, I don't wanna have to talk about this issue again." However, having always believed it's better to err on the side of oversharing than undersharing with my
Mhm.
family,
Mhm.
I can the fruits of that are happening now
Mm.
because so for example, we did family, weekend at the University of Arizona, and we had the whole family come. And boy, those dynamics that first time you're all together again, they are wonky because
Mm.
everybody's like, who am I? Am I back in the dynamic of when we all lived in the same house together?
Mm.
Oh, but wait, I've also been living this independent life. So we talked about that. We talked about, look, the dynamics are going to be strange at first. You know, you've
Mhm.
been independent, you've been on your own, and now here's mom, you know, because my youngest sometimes was like, I feel like I should be asking you if I'm allowed to do something because you're now here.
Yeah.
But I haven't been asking you for a while and that kind of a thing. And those dynamics shift, and you have to be able to talk about those because otherwise everybody's going to go fall back into whatever their comfort position was in the family dynamic.
Mm.
And you don't want that. You want them to be able to start to blossom into who they're going to be independently so that you
Yeah.
can start having those adult relationships with them. And
Yeah.
that's a hard dynamic because as parents, it's very easy for us to want to know everything. It's very easy for us to worry about everything. And that's not going away, by the way, even if you know everything. It's very easy for
Mhm.
us to want our children to be our babies, right?
Mm.
But they're not our babies. And and they are our babies. And so both of those things are true at the same time. And so we have to
Yeah.
figure out how to develop a new adult relationship going forward. And that does mean, which is one of the hard parts about this stage in life, that we're going to lose some things. We're
Yeah.
going to lose getting to know what our kids are doing every moment of the day. We're going to lose helping them make really important decisions.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
we're going to lose those kinds of things. There was an article um talking about the emotions that can get stirred up when you're an empty nester. And I was telling
Mm.
you recently that one of the things that's happening to me that has surprised me is I could start to I feel like I'm on the verge of tears all the time.
Mm.
Now, I am menopausal, so so
Mhm.
let's not discount that. Um, which a lot of people are at this
Right.
um, stage, I should say, in parenting. But I feel like I could burst into tears at any moment while feeling, again, going back to those conflicting feelings, super happy for my children and for what's happening in their lives.
Yeah.
All three of my kids have super exciting things going on in their lives right now in this journey of adulthood. And
Mm.
I'm so happy for each of them in those things. And I'm on the
Mhm.
verge of tears every time. So there was this article in verywellfamily.com, and I'll post it in the show notes, that said that here are some of the emotions you might be feeling. Sad that your child has grown up. So I mentioned that.
Mhm.
Angry at yourself for not being more available to them in the past.
Mhm.
So that's where I say, like, I'd rather err on the side of over communicating than under communicating. I actually don't have that.
I was gonna say, I'd be surprised if that was something that you were experiencing.
It's not something I'm experiencing. Now there are times when I literally wake up in the middle of the night and go, "Oh my God, I forgot to teach my child this."
Yes. Oh my god. There's a lot of that.
And
Because
I
I always
actually
think there's not always a natural time to teach them
yes,
certain things. Like there are certain things you just have to bring up and teach them, and you don't know when to do that. Like,
right.
when was I gonna do that? And then you run out of time and it's like, oh crap.
Well, and it's interesting because when those have happened, I've actually texted them and said, have we talked about this?" And in
Mm.
every single one, the child in question has responded, "Oh yeah, I had to figure that out, but I did it." So like one of
Mm.
my kids had a
Mhm.
major banking issue that they had never
Mhm.
had to deal with on their own and had to go to the bank like 3 times after work
Mhm.
in order to get this situation taken care of. And when I had actually thought of this banking issue
Mhm.
in the middle of the night. It had to do with automatic bill paying. And
Mm.
when I asked him about it, he was like, "Oh, mom, actually, you'll never guess. I actually had to deal with just last week," and told me all about how it was handled. And it was really an adult situation that,
Yeah.
so now you know who it is because I said he, but my that my son handled beautifully with some bumps along the road. So that made me
Mm.
feel like, okay, I didn't teach them everything. That's all right. They're figuring
Right.
this stuff out. They have the bigger thing. The other
Yeah.
one is that you could be nervous about the state of your marriage. Um,
Oh,
I
interesting.
I was actually nervous driving home about the state of my marriage because I was like,
Uh-huh.
we we have focused so much on our kids. We've been
Oh.
homeschoolers, that kind of a thing.
Mhm.
But it did not take long for us to remember that we had an amazing dating life as husband and wife before
Mhm.
children, and we've jumped right back into that,
Yeah.
um, and jumped into sharing some of our hobbies. My husband knits as well, so we share that hobby, sharing some of the things that we do, watching shows that the 2 of us have really wanted to watch together, but haven't really been able to do, going to a lot of museums in different places. So I do feel pretty confident about that, but I think that that's probably very scary for a lot of people and
Mm.
something that you have to just really remember who you were before your children came. Another one that
Mm.
they say in Very Well, what's it called? Very Well Parenting,
Very
verywelladult.com.
well, family.
Family, that's right.
Mhm.
Is that you might be scared that you're getting older, growing older.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
What
think.
you all right, talk to us. You had a reaction to that one. Go on.
No, it's just, it's just one of those things. Like I was at a meeting the other day and everybody was introducing themselves and their age. And I was like, I'm Annie and I'm 47. I had to think about it for a minute. And it's like at this age, I mean, I'm still younger than you, but
You're still like way younger than me. I just
no, but
turned
it's like,
54.
at every age, you sort of like you say it out loud and then you're like, wait, that can't be right.
That cannot be right.
Then you do the calculations and you're like, oh crap, that is right. What?
I
How? I don't
know.
get it.
Well,
Yeah.
like my husband and I were just realizing the other day that I'm 2 years older than his mom was when I met her.
Right. We're at that stage now too. Javad was saying the other day, like we're basically the same age his parents were when we got married. So like thinking about all those memories and like our picture of them and their
Yes.
age at that time and like, oh, that's
So
us.
what how is it that our generation is so much younger than their generation was at this age? I don't know how that
Yeah.
works out.
60 is the new 40, right? I mean, sure.
Okay, another one that we're well in terms of the strong emotions, is that we might feel frustrated that we're not where we imagine we'd be at this phase in our lives. What do you
Oh,
think about that
almost.
one?
That's interesting. Kind of like a midlife crisis-y type feeling, maybe.
Yes. How do you feel? Are you
Well,
having that?
no. Mainly because mainly because I have never been Like, I hated those exercises in school where they would be like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you
Oh,
see yourself in 10 years? I hated those exercises because I don't think that far ahead. I don't like to, because
yes.
I know it's not going to happen. Like, I know that no matter what you try to predict 5 years from now, I mean, look back 5 years and think about like how much is different
Right.
in your life than what you would have anticipated 5 years ago. Like, life is just like that. Things change. You can't predict what's going to happen. You can't anticipate. And like, I've never wanted to make a 5 year plan or a 10-year plan or a 20-year plan. Like, it's just not in my personality or brain or something. So, because I didn't have any expectations of where I would be at this stage, I don't feel any disappointment at not having
That's
met
so
those expectations.
good. That's
I
one
don't
of
know if it's good. It's just the way it
It's
is.
good. It's one of the things I really admire about you and like try to emulate in you because you really are that way. And that's so good. And actually, you are in a great place in life. But I imagine even if you
Mm.
weren't doing, even if you weren't smashing your career as well as you are, is smashing still positive? Smashing,
I think
winning
it's
at, I
also,
don't know, your career as much as you are, I think you'd probably still feel that way knowing you. Yeah.
yeah.
I actually had more of this concern prior to them leaving than
Mm.
after them leaving. And the reason is that I now have a ton of time to do what my ultimate goal is, which is writing this memoir. And I've been writing like mad lately. And largely it's because I have all this time to write. In fact, when they're home for Thanksgiving and when they're home for the winter holidays, I plan on just not trying to write because I don't want to lose that time with them. But
Mm.
w- I, I mean, let's be real, without the constant interruptions and
Tell us.
constantly,
Please
yeah,
tell us about this,
what's
Paula.
that
Please
like?
just describe it in detail. Describe one of your days of complete freedom and quiet in detail, please.
It's funny because my oldest kid who lives here, not here in the house, but here in town, is always worried,
Mhm.
that I'm lonely, which is so funny because my kids all did that when they were little. Like I'd be on the toilet. Mama, are you okay in there? You're probably really sad to be in there alone.
Oh my
Children,
gosh.
I'm never sad to be going to the bathroom alone. Never. So she is really worried that I'm really lonely, or that I have to be, just with my husband. But
Mm.
I'm really loving having all this time to write and time
Yeah.
to knit because fiber is a huge part of the memoir that I'm writing.
Yes.
And I'm really excited to have all the time to be with my husband. So sorry, kids. I miss that's another one of those conflicts is I miss them tremendously. And I
Mhm.
really appreciate this opportunity to be moving forward with this part of my writing life. And
Yeah.
I'm realizing now I would not have been able to write what I'm writing now with them in the home. So I'm going to add to
Mm.
that Very Well family where they talk about all the places that are really hard when you're empty nesting. They
Yes.
missed out on a big one. And this group of people gets left out a lot. And that
Mm.
is people who had difficult relationships with their own parents at this stage.
Mhm.
This might be a very triggering time. And for me, that
Mm.
is certainly true. So since I lost my relationship with my parents at 20,
Yeah.
my son was 20 when he flew the nest,
Mhm.
exactly the age that I was then. And my daughter was 18. But she went to college, which is what I did.
Yeah.
And my parents were very against me going to college at all. In my family, it was military or nothing. And those two things have been incredibly triggering to me through no fault of my children. And so
Yeah.
I started doing like double sessions of therapy
Mhm.
just to have the time to really process this. And
Yeah.
that has been instrumental in me getting through this time period not because they're gone, but because what it was like for me when I was on the other side of this relationship. And
Yeah.
I think that there probably is a huge population of people who came from families like my own, or not even as challenging as that, who had a really hard time with this time of their life when they were the child, for whom this time period is shockingly triggering. I would say that has
Mm.
been the hardest part of being an empty nester, how painful it is. how
Yeah.
painful it was for me. Obviously, I'm going to need more therapy, but I'm scheduled for next week. But how painful it was for me in this period and how much I lost because I'm watching
Mhm.
my kids get to blossom. And I do think a lot of the fact that they get to blossom is because they know that we want them to blossom. Sorry.
No,
I'm
it's
hoping those of
okay.
you who know what I'm feeling will find this maybe partially cathartic for you. It's hard to watch your kids get something that you didn't get. And it's
Mm.
beautiful to be the person who's giving them something. Geez, Annie, who's giving them something that you didn't get. So we get to give our kids something that we never had. And that's really healing. These are not tears
That's-
as much of sadness as it is of healing. So
Yeah.
I think if there's one thing we want, I'm gonna just reach back here and get some tissue. If there's one thing we want for our kids as young adults, is to recognize that we get a chance to give them experiences we might not have gotten.
Yeah.
And we get a chance to relive those experiences from the other side and hopefully allow ourselves to heal from that.
Yeah.
But I do think we can't do it alone. I think most of us probably need a little extra outside help. I know that
Mhm.
there were a lot of things when my son went away that was probably harder than in many ways in terms of anxiety because he was 20. Um, it was the same age that I was when I lost my relationship with my parents.
Mhm.
Um, so I was internalizing mistakes that he was making as a failure on my part.
Mhm.
And then through therapy was able to recognize that the fact that he could make mistakes was actually a success on his part, that he's out there making mistakes and then growing from them and learning from them.
Yeah.
So this I think that something that a lot of publications are missing and a lot of therapists are missing and a lot of people talking about this stage are missing is how triggering it can be for those of us who did not have a smooth journey when we were the same age.
Yeah. That's so interesting. It hurts my heart that you experienced that. I mean, I can't, I love you so much, you know this.
I
And
know.
every time you talk about your experiences as a young person, it breaks my heart. It's just, it's tragic. Um,
I love you too. And can I just say though, I wouldn't be this parent without having had those experiences. I wish I didn't have those experiences, but
yeah,
at the same time, I shouldn't say it that way. I don't want to say it that way because I don't want to make it sound like everybody should go through something like that. You'll be a great
right.
parent.
No,
No, what I'm
yeah,
trying to say is because I have been very fortunate to have the ability to be able to process all of that and come out this other end
yeah.
and be a different person.
Well, and it made me think about, so, you know, as you were first describing this stage with your kids being triggering from your own experiences, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if it's also healing. And then you went into that. Um, but it reminds me a bit of, in some ways, it's almost like an exposure therapy. So in exposure therapy, you purposefully trigger yourself, but you do it in a way with therapy. I mean, this is why having a therapist is so important. You do it
Right.
in a way, you process it in a specific way, or in an intentional way, I guess I should say. It's not necessarily one specific way, but you process it intentionally to reformat the way that it's being experienced. And it sounds like it's so wise for you to have upped your therapy through this process, so that you can um, reformat those experiences in your mind. It's not necessarily reformatting, but so that you can process your own experiences while also helping your kids through these experiences of their own. um, so
There
hard.
is a bit of reformatting. I mean, there's a bit of reframing a lot of it.
Mm,
But I was seeing myself putting I was seeing myself responding to those triggers in a way that wasn't fair to my kids. It's not fair to them because it's not their fault that they're growing up, you know.
Right.
It's not their fault. It's my parents' fault that I didn't have the experience that you would want any child growing into adulthood to have. So, and I was seeing myself responding to some of their emotions and some of their experiences in ways that was 100% due to the trigger from my own previous experiences. And I just didn't want to do that to them. And I think as parents, we're always doing that, right? We're always experiencing our children through our own lenses. So I think one big thing about this process is getting yourself into a situation where you can be really figuring out how you're doing that and how to do it in the most healthy way, because you're never going to not do that. You're never going to not view our children through our own lenses, but we can do it in a way that is more balanced and more healthy. And I think for a lot of people who had, it doesn't even have to be people who had like a traumatic childhood in their families like I did, but so a lot of people, for example, high school was a really painful time for them in many ways, or even if they didn't know it was painful at the time, they picked up a lot of things that became painful later on. So when we have kids in high school going through some of those same experiences, no matter how healthy our family was, that can even be really triggering.
So did you talk to your kids about all of this? Like, did you, or have you, or are you like talking them through, like, this is why I'm responding this way? I mean, they know about you're so communicative about all of this stuff. I'm sure. So they understand your like maybe initial responses to things, and then like they know where that's coming from.
Yes. So we have talked about it. And so I'm a firm believer that how do I explain this? In relationships, everybody's coming with their own challenges, right? And while we can't necessarily accommodate every single challenge, there are certain large things that we could try to accommodate. And I've explained it like this. If you had a parent in a wheelchair, you would work hard to accommodate whatever your parent needs. You know, so if you had for example, if you had a play, you would tell your parents, here's the entry you're going to want. Here's the entrance you're going to want to go in because this is where the ramp is, that kind of a thing. There are certain kind of big emotional things that I think it's okay for our kids to feel a sense of responsibility in accommodating that. So a big one for me is distance, like not communicating is really painful for me because in my family, not communicating was ghosting. My family invented ghosting. Before there was even ghosting, my family invented ghosting. And if you said the wrong thing, you would get stonewalled. And then oftentimes a stonewall led to the end of a relationship. And so I have asked my kids, I just need some form of communication. I just need something that says, I'm still in your life. It's not because I don't think that you're in my life. It's not because I think you're going to ever leave me, but I just, even if it's just an emoji, and even if you're really angry at me, I was like, you could send me a middle finger emoji. I don't care. I just need something that says, hey, I'm still here. And we haven't really run into that being necessary for them to do that, but that was one of them. My son asked the other day, he said, hey mom, when you're in big moments of anxiety, what's the best thing for me to do for you? Which was really lovely that he asked that. And I reiterated, just, you know, just letting me know when you're safe is the best thing for me. And so they do. All of my kids at some point during the day, when they go to bed, I'm in my bed, I'm safe.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think that's a huge ask because the reward for it in me is immense. I don't ever have to go through that experience of, oh my gosh, did something terrible happen to them? Or, you know, and again, here's the thing for those of you who have anxiety, or for those of you who've been through any kind of major trauma, it's not like I'm telling my brain to have these responses, to have anxiety. It just happens. So, and I can't control it. I can figure out how to manage it, but I can't control it. So a very simple heart emoji at 3 a.m. is mentally life-saving for me. And then likewise, whatever they need to help with their mental health, I'm happy to do for them too. So I think asking our kids to accommodate some form of our mental health, if we've come from this experience of trauma, as long as it's not unreasonable or as long as it's not putting something on them, is a good thing.
So do you think that you will always need them to check in like that? Or is this kind of a newly empty nest feeling? Or do you have any gauge of that at all?
You know, a wise person once told me not to try to look ahead. No, that's a good question. I think it's probably something I'm needing to get through this transition. And I'm thinking there will be another transition coming up. It's very interesting. Remember when your kids were little and they would wake up in the morning and you would be like, you literally grew last night, or your face literally changed last night. And I believe there are even scientific studies that say that that's actually true.
Yeah.
I'm feeling that again at this stage where, but for me, so sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and think, oh, I didn't check for that goodnight text right away. Look at that. Or, hey, we've gone the whole day without a check-in and I'm not freaking out.
Yeah.
So I notice about me a daily kind of growth and change. So I think there will be a different transition.
Yeah.
At some point, I hope. How about you? How do you, because your kids are home, but they're able to be out and about if they need to be. And I know you have a little bit of a different situation, but how did you handle the first, I think you had a situation where one child wasn't checking in late at night. How are you handling that?
Yeah, that's been an interesting journey for us because my oldest, who's now 22, took a while to get to that kind of stage of independence of even being out late at all because of a lot of anxiety issues and things. So she's doing a lot better with that. And along with doing better comes a lot of spontaneous things being out and stuff, which is great. but we went from like not going out at all to all of a sudden like, oh, they're out late at night. Like we didn't have any kind of established like check-in time but like check-in process or anything like that because we just it had never come up. So it's come up very late probably in terms of the average or norm or whatever. So but they're at an age where it's like, okay, you don't really need to check in, you're 22. But then at the same time, you know, she's still living at home, driving one of our cars.
Right.
Like there's this like there's still an enmeshed reality here that's different than a lot of people who are living on their own at 22. So yeah, figuring out that like, do we need to have her check in? I don't know. Like we had to kind of have this, and I'm not a person who tends to worry. But when this kind of all of a sudden became a reality, and we would hear about it after, like you know, she's very communicative with us about what she's doing and whatnot, which is great. But we'd always hear about it after the fact. And so then when all of a sudden she's out until like 2 a.m. with a friend having like a good bonding cry session, we don't know that that's happening. So I'm like, okay, you know, we're going to bed. She's not home yet, which is fine. She's an adult, but this is a new reality for us that I don't know if like, oh, is she like slaughtered in a field somewhere? I don't normally have these kinds of worries, but you know, your brain starts to sort of like go when you're like, because I couldn't get a hold of her. It was like I was calling and texting and not responding. So that was more of the issue. It was like, okay, like I just need to know that you're alive. Like stay out as late as you want. You're an adult, but like if I'm texting you and there's no response, then I start to get a little bit worried. So when I said, can you please just let us know? I mean, she totally was understanding. She's like, oh yeah, I'm so sorry. You know, like it wasn't any kind of a like, I don't want to need to check in with you. I'm a grown up kind of a thing. There was none of that. It was just, you know, she was deep in conversation and had her phone on silent and wasn't paying attention to it. I mean, it's understandable, but at the same time, it was a weird experience for me because, as you know, like I said, I don't
You
tend to
don't
worry
worry.
until there
Yeah.
is something to worry about. And she went through actually her own experience recently with being on the other side of this, in that she had a classmate who nobody had heard from for a few days, and professors were asking my daughter, like, have you seen or heard from so and so? And she hadn't, and then other people were asking, and so they went to go try to find this person who's in their music program, and it was really scary for a few hours. My daughter's
Mm.
texting me going like, nobody's heard from this person, like we're really, really worried. They have 2 roommates, but nobody could get a hold of the roommates, and I was trying to tell her, like, through text, like, she's like, I'm freaking out, should I be freaking out? And I'm like, that, there's a reason not to freak out until you have all the information. Like, I don't think anybody's contacted this person's family. um is the school involved? Has the school tried to contact this person's family? That kind of a thing. But even then, I was even getting nervous. I was like, this is not a good sign if somebody in college has not been heard from for, it was like 4 or 5
Right.
days.
Oh
But
my goodness.
anyway, they ended up fine. It turned out that they were okay. And I haven't gotten the whole story of like what happened, but people go through periods of all kinds of things, and they might not be fully okay, but they're here. um but that scare for her, I think, was really kind of drove home the, like, oh yeah, because they don't, I was thinking about this in the shower this morning, they don't have the perspective of a parent,
Right.
even though they can try to put themselves into their parents' shoes. And I feel like my kids are really good about that. Like, they
Yes.
they understand, like, I think, and that's part of that communication. I think that ongoing communication is, they know, like, how we're processing stuff, and we talk with them a lot about that. Like, okay, this is my perspective as your mom,
Right.
on various things. So we've tried to explain that parental perspective, but they still don't, until you're a parent, you really don't know.
No.
You don't know. You don't fully understand the depths of the worry, the concern, the love, all of that. It's just, you can't until you're in those shoes.
One of the things that you said the other day, you said every kid who goes to college or gets to be college age is going to have different really hard experiences. They're going to, if they're not a person in this experience, they might have a person who dies in their life. They might have a person who attempts suicide or complete suicide in their lives. They might have a person be hospitalized because of drugs or alcohol. And I thought that was such a good reminder of some of the things we need to prepare our children for before they reach that stage, that those
Yeah.
things might happen. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So when this scare happened with my oldest, this was just last week, that person was missing for a few days. And my fear was suicide. Which is interesting because that's not where my daughter's brain went. This is very close to the time period last year where a classmate of hers was killed in a car accident, and that was
Mm.
really traumatic and rough. Um, so there was a lot of just kind of reliving that, uh, learning about that had happened. And like, we live 15 minutes from the college, and she had her own car over there, had driven to school, and she called and wanted us to come. She didn't feel like she could drive home. Like, she was,
Mm.
feeling so distraught that she didn't want to drive. And so we were able to, drive over there and drive her home. But it made me think about, like, kids who are away at school, like, those were really hard things to go through, especially, I mean, I think about, like, freshmen. It's so interesting being in your 40s and looking at someone who's 18 and being like, my God, you are a baby.
Right.
Well, they're not. They're technically adults, and but those years, those early adult years, are so rife with learning to be independent, and going through experiences and trying to figure out for yourself, like, oh, is this a situation where I really need my parent, or is this something where I can rely on my peers or my friends or my support group or professors or counselors or whoever, whoever you're around. And of course, it's different for everybody depending on where they are, but and so different depending on personality. And I think so different just generationally. Like one of the things you were talking about earlier with, when we were in college, I mean, I didn't talk to my parents very often when I was in college.
Right.
I don't remember how often, but it wasn't that frequent. And it certainly wasn't daily. We had, when I went to college, we did have email at that point.
We did not.
It was fairly right. Yes, this is the generational difference between.
Yes, this is the generational divide.
We had
Actually,
email.
I should say there probably was email for people like my husband who was who was in that department.
Right.
But for those of us theater kids, we didn't know what email was yet.
But even then, I mean, I wasn't emailing my parents all the time. It was like a check-in
Right.
every once in a while. And I think about that frequently, about how even like at the end of college, like I went away to Japan. I went and like traveled literally halfway around the world without cell phones.
Right.
Like I would email my parents, and that was really about it. We had calling cards to call long distance. But that constant communication that we have
Right.
with our kids now just wasn't a thing. And so I think and this generation, and I wonder how much of it is because of technology, but I know from what I've read and just seen a lot, like the Gen Z kids, which is all of my kids and your kids, are closer to their parents than we were. We were the Gen X,
For sure.
like latchkey kids or whatever, and even though I had a good relationship with my parents, we didn't have the same like constant communication kind of thing that we have with our kids now. So it's interesting to look, as kids are going away to college, on the one hand, they do have the ability to contact their parents and the kind of norm of contacting parents more frequently. But then at the same time, because they have had that like emotional reliance on their parents, a lot of them, not everybody, but a lot of them, I wonder if like going away is actually harder on this generation of kids in some ways than it was for us, who sort of had that. I feel like we had more emotional independence, if that's a term. I feel like that's kind of silly because there's nothing. I feel like independence sounds like an always positive term, and I don't think it always is. There are people who are forced into independence, different kinds of independence that, I don't think there's anything wrong with having emotional connections with people, with your parents and whatnot. So, but I wonder if it's different for this generation of kids to be going away.
I think there must be a both and on this situation, because yes, we had emotional independence, but were we handling it well? Were we actually getting the kinds of support that we needed to get, whereas our kids can get that support. When I had a friend who died in a car accident, I was lucky because it was a small campus. It was a Lutheran campus. We had a campus pastor. Our campus pastor really took care of us in terms of how we were handling everything. I think it was done well. I didn't have any emotional support from family members at all. And I think a lot of other people might not have too. Even people who had healthy relationships with their family members probably weren't getting the kind of support that they could have used at that time as well. So yes, we were more emotionally independent, but we probably could have used more support than we had at that time. I'm with you. I think it's great that our kids are getting more emotional support. There was actually an article in the Atlantic that I didn't pull up for this, but I can't remember what the headline was. It was sensational. It was something like, let's stop pretending that intensive parenting is a bad thing. So it was reframing helicopter parenting as intensive parenting, I think, or what people are calling lawnmower parenting. It was reframing it as intensive parenting. But apparently there is a lot of evidence that really involved parenting has had really positive benefits for kids going into adulthoods. It did make the caveat that you can go overboard and then you have kids who are emotionally stunted. A lot of times though, when I'm looking at patterns because we tend to go, oh, this generation is, messed up. They're too sensitive. They're this and they're that. And yes, that is happening. But also, I think that was also happening back in the late 80s when I was in college. We just didn't know it. It just
Yeah.
wasn't happening on a social media platform.
Yeah.
There were kids who were probably too sensitive for for what they needed to be independent at that time as well. We just didn't know it. So I
Yeah.
think probably both things are happening. Maybe there is some emotional immaturity that is going too far, and we're seeing more of it.
Yeah.
But then also maybe our kids knowing that they have resources to go to when terrible things happen, like a death on campus, maybe that allows them to feel more independent because
Yeah.
they know that their safety nets are in place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Intensive parenting. The one it's funny because in a lot of ways, I feel like we have been intensive parents. I mean, we homeschool our kids. We spent a lot of time with them,
Right.
and we're very communicative and all of that kind of stuff. So, like, we have been very intensive parenting. But there is a line, like you were saying, sometimes it crosses over. Like, you'll hear stories of like parents contacting college professors about their child's
Yes.
grade or something like that. I'm like, whoa. Like I am an involved parent and whatnot, but I would never even think about contacting a
No.
college professor to talk to them about my child's grade. Like what?
I've heard professors say that they get contacted by by parents all the time. And I've heard people say that employers say that they get contacted by the
Yeah.
parents all the time. So that's maybe beyond
Yeah.
intensive.
Yeah. That's beyond. I think that's where the lawnmower thing comes in.
Yeah. Well, we did a lot of when our kids were young, we started to have them do a lot of things on their own. Like we started having them make all their own doctor's appointments on their own when they were about 15 years old. Um,
Mm,
because I wanted them to know how to do that,
yeah.
and we started a lot of we started having them do banking kind of when they were younger, start their own banking processes, start their own creating their own accounts for things and all of that
Mhm.
when they were a little bit younger, just because we wanted them to be able to make a lot of mistakes while they were still under our roof so that
Mm.
we could help them through those mistakes. Because here's something that a lot of parents might not know. Your kid will probably make a really huge stupid financial mistake when they're a young adult and they're financially earning money and handling their own money. um, they will probably make a very large financial mistake. And you will probably feel shame about that financial mistake. And then you will find out that every kid is making that same financial mistake. So one of my kids didn't know that you were paying extra for DoorDash. So this child thought that DoorDashing only included the price of the actual item. And then they all have an app on their phone that can tell you where your money is being broken down and being spent at. When they
Yeah.
realized at the end of a month that they had spent an enormous amount of door dashing, coffee, and
Mm.
smoothies, it was a shocker. Now the child was making all of their own money. It was their own money that they made the mistake with, but
Mhm.
it was a pretty big shocker. And at first we were really ashamed of that. And then I thought back to when I was a young adult. I didn't know that if you didn't pay a parking ticket, that the parking ticket fees would go up exponentially.
Mhm.
And I had
Mhm.
kind of a similar situation thing happen where I just kind of kept ignoring these parking tickets, these parking tickets. Like I didn't have a
Mhm.
lot, and
Yeah.
it just the price went up crazy amount. And then when I went in to pay them, I was absolutely flabbergasted by this mistake. So I think I want parents to know that that's going to happen. They're going to make a huge mistake, even under your watch, but you kind of want it to happen while they're with you in your house
Yeah.
so that you could educate them and teach them about it. And the other thing is that there are so many things happening with technology nowadays that we never had to deal with. So there are a lot of ways nowadays that our kids don't even have to look at the amount of money that's going in and out of their accounts.
Oh, it's so easy probably because yeah, to just overspend because you don't have to
Right.
really. Yeah, no.
Or
Everything's
because
automatic. You just click
subscriptions,
the button.
right. They're not thinking, oh, this is my sixth subscription to something.
Right.
And now that's $60 a month as opposed to $10 a month.
Yeah.
So it's nice when those things happen under your watch. So I
Mhm.
do recommend that people start kind of early, having your kids do those things that they might make mistakes on, so
Yeah.
that you can talk about it and try to come at it without there being a shame component. That's a mistake we made with the one child who made a lot of those financial mistakes, as we came at it feeling shame ourselves.
Yeah.
And so when things have happened subsequently, we've tried really hard to come at it without there being that base of shame.
Very wise, Paula.
Well, it comes with, you know, some children are the sacrificial lambs for other children. Do you have any more thoughts, Annie, about just raising, because you have kids who are adults and at home. So not just raising older kids, but having them be home throughout that process.
But it is interesting because our parenting has been so parallel
Mhm.
for most of it. And it's so interesting to be at this stage where like we're both raising, or not raising, I guess, we're both parenting adult children, but mine have not left the nest yet. And
Right.
it's a different dynamic, I think. And it's funny because like I'm happy to have them here. I'm also happy for them to gain that independence when the time comes. Um, I think I would have had a hard time with them. Well, I don't know, with them going away like right after high school if they went far away from college like I did. Like I went from Washington State and I went to college in Iowa.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel for parents. Like I see all of the posts and everything. Like I could totally see how hard that would be. Now my we're not sure yet what my oldest is going to do when she graduates this spring. She might go on to grad school, but my other adult child who's just 18 is planning on spending at least a year in Haifa, Israel, doing a year of service at the Baha'i World Center. So that's going to be a whole, if that pans out, it's going to be a whole different thing, like not just going away
Right.
to college, but going away to
Leaving the
another country.
country.
Yeah. So, but I'm excited for her for that. Like, I think it's actually a really great thing for her. So much also depends on the child or adult, but the adult child and like who they are, where they're at, what they're ready for, what is a good amount of pushing out of their comfort zone.
Right.
To something that is, because there are some times I think that there are some kids who aren't ready to go away. Like I've
Yeah.
seen stories of that too, like through grown and flown and whatnot. Like there's the kids who have the rough period, the 3 to 6 weeks or whatever, where they're lonely and everything's, they haven't made good connections yet and whatnot. But then there's also people who just legitimately like weren't ready or went to the wrong place or whatever. And you have to really keep that line of communication open and know your kid, I think.
Well, and let a lot of things be okay. I think that's an important lesson for us to teach our kids. It's okay to
Mhm.
shift gears as
Mhm.
an adult. And it's okay if your whole life have said you wanted to do one thing, which my youngest did. Her whole
Mhm.
existence, she wanted to be a doctor. And then
Yeah.
about 3 years ago, she said, actually, I think I want to be an actor. It's okay to shift those gears. And we want our kids to feel like we don't have specific expectations of who they're going to be when they grow up. They can surprise us too. And I noticed that
Mhm.
that change from our kids as sophomores to them as seniors
Mhm.
is intense.
Mm.
I feel like the changes going on for our kids between 16 and, well, now 22 are probably as rapid as birth to 4 years old.
We were talking the other day about with my 18-year-old, we were like calculating how old all the kids were when the pandemic started.
Yes.
And like she was 15. And we were like,
Right.
oh, like from 15 to 18, like those are big, big, big years. And to have experienced those years with a global pandemic and all kinds of, you know, different the entire structure of life changed during those years. and was inconsistent. It was all over the place. And like, that's a
Right.
lot. It's a lot to have experienced. And, you know, we went through this same conversations with my oldest, who was in her like sophomore, junior year of college
Yes.
during that main 2-year period. Also huge, because she had just started really becoming more social and making friends when the pandemic hit and everything shifted and everything changed. And there was a lot of setback, and it was hard. Like, you know, I think we really need to make sure, and I feel like this isn't really happening because things feel more normal now, even though the pandemic is still going on, folks. The that there's a lot of impact from those 2 years,
Right.
that we need to like just honor. You know, I don't think there's a lot of that kind of conversation gets wrapped up in, oh, we shouldn't have done this, or this was so damaging, and this was so, you
Right.
know, blah blah, blah. I, like you said, there's the both and, you know, element of this. And I think though that we need to just be aware of how those years have impacted all of us. I mean, there's all
Right.
kinds of parts of that were hard.
And some of those effects might not be happening to your child right now.
Mhm.
So you might have a 17-year-old applying for college and everything seems smooth and oh gosh, they've gotten over those the time that they were out of school for the pandemic or working from home. But it might not hit them until they go to college or until a year into college. And I think we need to take shame away from different journeys. My
Mhm.
oldest has had a very different path. She had the 5-year plan, and the pandemic really convinced her that she needed a different path. So her path has been like this,
Mhm.
but now she's getting a completely free education through her work because she's in phlebotomy,
Mhm.
and she'll graduate with a BS, I think, a year later than she would have graduated before, um, in health management. And so she
Yeah.
was so scared of her path diverting from what other she was
Mhm.
seeing other people doing. She was seeing other people do the high school to college graduating, and her path was diverting from that, and it really was upsetting to her. And we kept saying, look at, you know, in 10 years it's not going to matter. In 15 years it's not going to matter. I think as parents
Yeah.
we need to remind ourselves of that frequently. If my child decides to take a gap year or not go to college or go a trade
Mhm.
route or go to a conservatory or go just to travel to do a year of service to volunteer in some way, that's a different route.
Yeah.
It's not the wrong route. It's not a
Yeah.
bad route. In fact, I would even argue that for some kids going straight to college, a 4-year college is a bad route.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, my my younger brother, who's arguably the most successful of the entire family, he tried college twice and did not, it was not a right path for him. Now, my younger brother is the cinematic director for in-game cinematics in World of Warcraft. So for Blizzard Entertainment. Anyway, he's this super hotshot guy in the gaming world. And, you know, he came about that without going to college. So,
right.
I mean, his path is not usual, but there are so many unusual paths. It's totally fine. I've had to remind both of my young adult children, like, you still have so many years ahead of you. Like, sometimes they'll get into a
Yes.
stage of like lamenting things they didn't do, or feeling like they're out of time for whatever it is that they have in their mind. I'm like, folks, you are so young. Like, you have
Right.
so much life ahead of you, and you have no idea, much like I was saying earlier, you have no idea what the future is going to hold. Next year could be a completely different life that you are have found yourself in. And it's not that you shouldn't make plans or like, you know, have goals or whatever. I think that's good, but you just, you know, be where you're at, be in the present, look forward to the future, but like don't, yeah, don't dwell in the past and don't fret too much over the future. Like, yeah.
And don't compare yourself to other people.
Oh,
You just don't know where your path is going to take you.
yeah,
You
that's
just
so huge.
you just can't know. Okay, so I think that's all I have. Do you want to give a quick update on what you did this summer?
Well, I hit a deer. That was
That's right.
exciting.
No, you did not hit it. Oh, this time you did hit
No,
the
this
deer.
time I did hit a deer. So I have been in the car 4 times in a deer collision experience. One time I was a passenger. Another time I was a passenger. One time I was driving and the deer ran into the side of my car, just
Just
like
like
in
in
that
Gilmore
Gilmore
Girls.
Girls episode.
Yeah.
It's just like that. When I saw that episode, I was dying because I was like, that's what happened to me. And yeah, like people don't believe you because they're like, what? That doesn't happen. No, it literally ran straight into the side of my car. And then this time I was driving on a 2-lane highway at night, driving a group of kids home from the theme park. And literally, I don't know if I intuited that it was going to happen or if I manifested.
Maybe.
I don't like driving at night. My 47-year-old eyes don't really love the nighttime driving anymore. I don't see so well at night anymore, Paula. Ah. And so I was driving on this 2-lane highway, and I hate 2-lane highways, and I'm surrounded by them where we live. And the whole time I'm thinking, please don't hit a deer. There's not that much of a chance of hitting a deer. I'm like looking at these fields and just surrounded by fields. And I'm thinking, the statistical chance of a deer running in front of my car when I'm driving 60 miles an hour, like just at that very moment, like that can't be that common, right? Like that can't statistically happen that often. And then it happened. In fact, it happened where the deer was hit by the oncoming car, which then bounced it right in front of my car. And then we hit it also. So it was like this double deer collision, which what are the chances of that happening?
Okay, stop now because band name, Double Deer Collision. Such a good band
I call
name.
myself the deer slayer because I have a friend here. I have a friend here who grew up in northern Idaho, like rural northern Idaho, and has lived here where we live, where there's a butt ton of deer out there, all for years and years and years and years, and she's never hit a deer. I'm like, how have you never hit a deer? No. And then the other thing, which you know very well about, because I've been sharing this with you for a little while, and I just shared on my Facebook page, is I, I learned a little while ago. I learned a long time ago that I talk in my sleep sometimes. Like that's been a known entity. And then I was on a girlfriend trip a couple years ago when I woke up in the morning in the hotel room with my 2 friends and I said, good morning. And they were like, morning, you okay? I was like, yeah, why? And they were like, you were making some weird sounds in your sleep last night. And then they described it as kind of like a siren-y sound. And I was like, what? I don't even know what that means. And so then a few months ago, my husband and son were having a little like boy sleepover in the living room, and my daughter decided to sleep with me. And she was awake longer than I was, and she happened to be awake during one of these episodes, and she grabbed her phone and recorded part of it. So when she when she pulled up the recording of it and shared it with me, I like almost peed my pants laughing.
Yes, because it is the funniest thing in the entire world.
Heard. Yeah, so I'm gonna play this one for you. This was the first time that we caught anything on recording. So let me turn up the volume here. I hope you can hear that. It sounds like I'm talking, it sounds like I'm talking baby talk to a dolphin or a fish or something. And so then we found this app, a sleep recorder app that records, like basically records you all night long, but then it like saves the snippets where there's actual sound happening in the room. So people use it for like determining how much they snore or sleep talk or whatever. It's an awesome app. It's been really fun. And it's so entertaining to find out what sounds I actually do make in the night, because some of them are friggin' weird.
Let me just say that I wake up many mornings to a text of Annie sending me the sounds from the night before. And I literally I cry in the morning. I'm laughing so hard. I'm crying to tears. And I need somebody to turn this into my ringtone so that every time Annie texts me or calls me, this is what I hear. Go ahead. You have to play this one.
Okay, so
are you playing the Mariah Carey one now? Or are you playing
I'll play the Mariah Carey. I have to figure out which one is the sleep scatting one. I think I know which one it is. They're not labeled on my little
The sleep scatting one happened when we were in Seattle together.
Yes. The sleep scatting one. Okay, so this was one that happened just like a week or two
Yeah.
ago.
This is Mariah Carey.
And let me point out the highest note at the beginning of this, I literally cannot make when I'm awake. I've tried. I can't hit this note. The one that I sustain, I can hit, but the one that happens before that. Anyway, here you go. Okay.
I don't know.
This is the siren sound, I assume. And then there's like a little bit of there's a little bit more happening. Here it goes. That was not much there. Yeah. So
okay,
yeah,
now do
I don't
the
know
sleep
what that
scatting
was
one.
about.
You have to play the
Yeah.
sleep scatting
So,
one.
I know. My husband slept through that. I don't know how he slept
Through
through
it.
that. Who can sleep through that?
I do
Yeah,
not know how he
not
sleeps
right.
through that.
I don't either. Okay, there's one of these is a sleep scatting one. So I'm gonna play this one. I'm not sure if it's a sleep scatting one. So it's so musical. It's so musical in my sleep. A lot of them are like that. They're like these like doing scales. They often have scales involved, and they often have like like this like kind of repetitive like a lot of them were with my mouth closed. That one with the blah 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 was it's so embarrassing. It's so weird. That's what Paula's daughter, when I showed it to her, she was like, that's so embarrassing. What's so funny though is like I shared them because I find them so funny.
I
And
don't
like
think
they're
it's
so
embarrassing.
absurd. It's not, because it's so weird and so absurd. It's like beyond embarrassment. Like
It's not like you're doing this on a bus. Although, oh my God, I would love to take you on some public transportation and have you fall asleep. Let's fly somewhere together because that would be awesome. But no, it's not like you're doing it in a public place. It's in the privacy of your own room, in your bed, and it is absolute hilarity and entertainment for the rest of us in your life who get to share a part of it with you.
It's so weird. It's
so awesome.
weird. Yeah.
It's so there must have you Googled it? Have you Googled like sleep scatting or sleep singing?
I didn't do sleep scatting. I've tried Googling sleep singing or singing in your sleep, but all the stuff that comes up is like results about being sung to sleep, like singing someone to sleep. So like I have to figure out like a very refined search term, I think, to figure it out. But yeah, I don't know. I got nothing.
And so your summer included hitting a deer and sleep scatting.
And sleep scatting and spending a weekend in Seattle with you, which was lovely. Right. And I was so excited because I got to take you to the Chihuly Glass Museum, which is a place that I had gone with my oldest daughter it was when we were on our big trip around the country. So she would have been like 13. And I was so blown away by it. And I am really cheap and don't like to spend a lot of money going to places. And it was like a more expensive museum than I would normally spend money to go to, but it's so mind-blowing. And I've always wanted to take people to it. And then we went, and then I was like worried, you know how sometimes you're like, oh no, did I overhype something? Like, did I remember this is not nearly as cool as, or way cooler than it actually is? But no, it's awesome.
If you haven't been there, you guys, here's the thing. We walked into some of the rooms in this place and I got full body chills. And there was one room that made me cry. And so my youngest daughter is in theater, and I texted her this picture of this room that you walked into with these incredible glass sculptures that had to have been made from thousands of different small parts. And I said to her, a bunch of people probably told him, you're not going to be able to make a living doing this. Nobody's ever going to want to pay you to do this. And here this man had created this art out of 1,000 tiny components. And it just blew my heart open. You can
Yeah.
create something spectacular out of a bunch of tiny little components that nobody could ever imagine would be
Mhm.
awe-inspiring or change the world. And here he has art all over the world.
Yeah.
And walking into that, no, that museum was 100% worth it.
Yeah, it's
100%.
incredible. It's right next to the Space Needle in Seattle. For those of you who haven't been, the artist's name is Dale Chihuly. If you look him up, you'd see some of his sculptures. It's just so colorful, and I mean, it's just art.
If you don't go to, if you
So
don't go to
dumb.
Seattle,
It's
yes,
just art.
it's just
But
art.
it
If you
really
go to
is.
Seattle for no
It's
other
pure
reason,
art.
go to for that museum.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, so my summer include, well, that was kind of fall, but we went, I got, like I said,
Oh,
I
that's
got to
right.
go up the coast this summer. Highly recommend that too. Although I highly recommend, if you have any fear of cliffs, that you go north and don't go south, because it's a little scary. But that was spectacular. Went up to Oregon for the Ashland Oregon Festival. That was incredible. And then got to go to Seattle and Arizona for this summer since we last podcasted. So I would say it was a pretty exciting summer and pretty eventful, given that it ended in our becoming empty nesters.
Yeah.
It's just brought it.
Just going back briefly to the conversation about,
Yeah.
art and whatnot. It makes me livid to no end when people talk about the arts as a
Yes.
not viable or not valuable or not useful career. Look behind you right now
Right.
at all of the artwork that's sitting behind you. Now we just have these handmade little
No, but do you know what?
flowers
This was
back
all
here.
done by my mother and mother-in-law. So all the
Oh,
botanicals
wow.
you see, my mother made. And then this
Yeah.
beautiful picture here, my mother-in-law drew. I'm also surrounded by a quilt that my mother-in-law made, because she's an
Yeah.
incredible quilting artist. So I'm surrounded by that beauty. What got us through the pandemic?
That
Actors,
is yes, I know. I mean, my
actors,
daughter is a music composition
music.
teacher. Like, we don't go anywhere without music. Every single store you walk into has music playing.
Yes.
Like, it's just an integral part of it's such an
Right.
integral part of our lives that people don't notice it.
Right. And don't recognize that somebody had to work really hard to make that thing happen. And I was a theater major and didn't decide to go into theater, but I have never once regretted having been a theater major, because everything I've ever done in my life that I've been successful at or good at, or that has made me satisfied, I've been successful at it because of the foundation that theater gave me. So I've never regretted it. I think the arts are so important. And if that's the path that your young adults are hoping to take, find a way to recognize how valuable and impactful it is.
Well, and you know what would also help that is if college was not so expensive.
Yes.
Because really what people often are looking at is the basic calculation of like, oh, is this going to pay for my enormous student loan that I have to take out in order to do this job? And I went into that with teaching. I became a teacher. Like, that was my major. And I went to a private college. Like, the math really didn't work out for that. And but I don't regret having a teaching degree. It's been a huge part of my life, even though I didn't technically like teach as a profession for a very long time. But like, we've got to make it so that people that are not going into, computer science or medicine or something that is, that is a high paying career can actually do it. Like, do we really want to live in a world where teachers can't afford to be teachers and artists can't afford to be artists? I mean, that's just so short-sighted. And so anyway, that's a whole
but going back to the raising adults or parenting adults conversation with this, that was a big determination for our daughter. We said to her, you have to have a school in the mix that you feel like is going to have a great program for what you want, is going to be in a location you want, and is going to be financially feasible, because you don't want to graduate and not be able to act, because you have to get a job that you can pay these high student loans for. And she did end up getting a school that allowed her to not have to take out a ton of loans. So that when she is out of college, she can go ahead and be a server in a restaurant while also auditioning. So yeah, that is an important factor when kids are going into a non-high money making educational pursuit. So Annie, funny story, you're going to be here next week.
I am. That's right.
But
I should ask on my Facebook page and see if there's a theme people want us to tackle.
oh, do
Or we
that.
could
That's
just
a good
ask
idea.
directly to our 2 listeners.
Hey, 2 listeners, what would you like us to talk
We
about?
have more than 2 listeners. We just have 2 listeners who consistently will hound us for when it's time to.
Actually, technically, I think it's 3. So that's pretty exciting.
Actually, if you count my daughter, who constantly is asking me when we're going to podcast again, then
Which daughter is it? Older or younger?
my middle.
Oh,
She was so excited to find out we were podcasting today. She's always like, when are you going to podcast again? I think she finds a great deal of comfort in listening to us talk to each other.
That's
it's like
fantastic.
it touches something deep in her childhood heart. I think to hear you and I having a conversation.
All
all
that time spent on the couch or on the beach with us talking and kids swirling around us and coming to us for food usually. Okay,
Yeah.
pal, then I'll see you next week.
Yay.
Okay,
Thanks.
love you.
Love you too.
Bye. Our music was written and performed by Avery Renault.
Our music and podcast is produced by Severin Fitzgibbons, known in the music world as Therajean.
If you have comments or questions for us, on both Instagram and Facebook, you'll find Annie at Annie Renault or Motherhood and More. You'll find Paula at fiberstoryteller. You'll find us both at Motherhood and More Podcast. Contact us via email at podcast@motherhoodandmore.com.